When Karoline Leavitt was fined by a judge just for wearing a cross, most thought she'd back down. Instead, she fired back, with the Constitution, and stunned the entire courtroom. The tension in the courtroom was electric. There are moments in a courtroom that feel less like legal proceedings and more like cinematic showdowns. This was one of them. The room was packed, spectators shoulder to shoulder, reporters lined up along the back wall, and a buzz in the air that something unexpected was about to happen. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but every phone was ready to record the moment court recessed. Eyes weren't just watching, they were waiting. And then, she walked in. Karoline Leavitt, a 29-year-old attorney known in legal circles for her intelligence but largely ignored by the mainstream press, made her way confidently to the front of the courtroom. She wore a striking purple blazer, sharp black slacks, and a simple gold cross necklace that rested just below her collarbone. Her blonde hair was curled professionally, her expression poised but firm. People murmured. Not about her credentials, she graduated top of her class. Not about her client, an ordinary woman caught in an extraordinary civil rights case. No, they talked about the cross. That one symbol, glittering gently under the courtroom lights, seemed to disturb the silence like a thunderclap. Karoline approached the podium, opened her binder, and prepared to begin her argument. But before she could utter a single word, the sharp crack of a gavel cut through the room. "Ms. Leavitt," the judge barked, his voice cold and echoing through the chamber. "That religious symbol violates this courtroom's commitment to neutrality. Remove it immediately, or I will hold you in contempt and fine you $250. There was a pause, brief, but heavy. The audience gasped. Several people turned to each other, stunned. A reporter from the local paper scribbled furiously into her notepad. In the back row, someone whispered, "Did he really just say that?" Karoline's eyes didn't flinch. Her breathing remained steady, her hands calm. She slowly closed the binder, took a step forward, and spoke with unwavering clarity. "Your Honor," she said respectfully, "I understand your concern. But with all due respect, my faith is not a distraction, it's part of my identity. This cross isn't a statement. It isn't a protest. It is simply a symbol of who I am." The judge narrowed his eyes. This is a courtroom. Not a pulpit. And yet, Karoline replied gently, this courtroom was built on principles that protect my right to express my beliefs, even silently, even with a necklace. There was a silence, but it wasn't empty. It was thick with meaning, as though the very air held its breath to hear what would happen next. The judge, clearly irritated, waved his hand and announced the fine anyway. "Contempt stands. Your statement will be struck from the record unless you comply." But Karoline didn't back down. She didn't plead, she didn't remove the necklace, and she didn't storm out. She turned to her client, a mother of two fighting charges from a peaceful protest, and nodded in reassurance. And then, like a true lawyer, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out something far more powerful than outrage, a written motion to challenge the fine on constitutional grounds. The courtroom, once tense with judgment, now buzzed with curiosity. Was she really doing this? Was she actually challenging the judge's authority, right here, right now? Yes. She was. Because Karoline Leavitt didn't just come to argue a case, she came to make a stand. And what followed in the days ahead would turn this courtroom standoff into a national debate, and make Karoline a household name. The $250 fine wasn't about the money, it was about the message. Judge Holloway, a man known for running a no-nonsense courtroom, didn't hesitate. He leaned forward with an edge in his voice. "Contempt of court. $250. Furthermore, your opening statement will be stricken from the record until this matter is resolved." He didn't look angry, he looked authoritative. Like a man who expected obedience and had little patience for challenge. But Karoline Leavitt? She didn't flinch. There was no flash of temper, no defensive tears, no outraged outburst. Instead, she calmly reached into her briefcase, pulled out a thin folder, and placed it on the table. Then she turned toward the judge and began speaking in the one language the court could never ignore. Constitutional law. Your Honor, she began with measured clarity, under the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, I have the protected right to express my beliefs, religious or otherwise, provided that such expression does not create a substantial disruption in the legal process. She paused, looking directly at the bench. My cross necklace has not disrupted the courtroom. But this fine, and this attempt to suppress my speech, does. The courtroom fell still. The gallery leaned in. Reporters lowered their pens to simply watch. It was a stunning pivot, from defendant to defender of the Constitution. And it was clear to everyone in the room, Karoline wasn't bluffing. Even the prosecutor, who had been half distracted moments earlier, now sat upright, exchanging nervous glances with his co-counsel. The clerk stopped typing for a moment, her fingers hovering above the keys. Something was changing. Karoline had seized the room. With absolute composure, she walked toward the bench and handed the judge a document. I'm filing a formal motion, Your Honor, she said. This fine is not only unjustified, it is unconstitutional. This court is bound by the same law that governs all citizens. And under that law, I am well within my rights. The judge took the folder, clearly surprised at how quickly it had been prepared. Karoline had come armed. Not with defiance, but with documentation, precedent, and principle. And outside the courtroom? The world was watching. People who had been live-tweeting the trial lit up the internet. Within minutes, photos of Karoline standing tall, cross-visible, eyes unshaken, began circulating on social media. The hashtag #crosscase exploded on Twitter and Instagram. Influencers, lawyers, pastors, and free speech advocates weighed in. A young attorney just gave a constitutional clinic to a federal judge. That courtroom just turned into a battleground for religious liberty. Karoline Leavitt, remember the name. Back inside the courtroom, Judge Holloway stared at the motion. His jaw was tense. His fingers drummed slightly against the bench. But for the first time in the proceeding, his confidence cracked. He looked, not defeated, but genuinely uncertain. Here was a young woman he'd dismissed only minutes earlier. A woman he'd expected to yield. Yet she had responded with one of the most well-argued legal motions he'd seen all year. No theatrics. No insults. Just law. He cleared his throat. I will review your motion and provide a ruling tomorrow morning. Until then, we'll move forward, provisionally. Karoline nodded and returned to her seat, motion granted, pride intact, and momentum building. The judge might not have admitted it out loud, but everyone saw it. Karoline had just shifted the balance of power in that courtroom. And from that moment on, it was clear, this case was no longer just about her client. It was about rights. Identity. The fight to be seen and respected without compromise. And Karoline was more than ready. The courtroom battle wasn't just about a necklace anymore. It was about justice. The case at hand was already charged with emotion before Karoline Leavitt even stepped into the room. A high-profile civil rights lawsuit involving a single mother named Tasha Green, arrested during a peaceful protest outside City Hall. She had marched with a sign, locked arms with fellow demonstrators, and stood silently as chants echoed around her. Yet, somehow, she ended up tackled, cuffed, and charged with resisting arrest. Karoline wasn't just defending a client. She was defending a symbol. A mother. A moment. And now, with her constitutional motion in the air and her integrity reaffirmed, Karoline pivoted to the real heart of the trial. What followed was a masterclass in legal precision. She began by breaking down the police body cam footage, not just playing it once, but slowing it frame by frame. Every flicker, every shouted command, every hand gesture was analyzed and explained to the jury. "You'll notice here," she said, pointing at a paused frame, "Tasha has her hands up, palms open, fingers spread. That's not resistance. That's compliance." The room was silent except for the occasional shuffle of feet. Jurors leaned forward, eyes fixed on the screen. Then came the cross-examinations. Karoline calmly confronted Officer Daniels, the arresting officer. "You testified under oath that my client was actively resisting, correct?" "Yes," he said. "And yet, in this footage, we hear you say, quote, 'She's not doing anything, just grab her.' Is that your voice, officer?" He hesitated. "Yes." "So which is it?" There was no answer. Just a courtroom buzzing with the sound of realization. Each witness brought in by the prosecution found themselves gently but firmly dismantled. Not with aggression, but with strategy. Karoline knew her facts. She cited landmark rulings like Terry v. Ohio and Graham v. Connor, drawing direct parallels to Tasha's case. Her arguments weren't just legally sound, they were storytelling with purpose. And she didn't stop there. At one point, as she addressed the jury, Karoline delivered a moment that would later go viral online. "If Rosa Parks had obeyed every unfair rule," she said, voice steady, eyes focused, "we wouldn't be sitting in this courtroom discussing justice. We'd still be arguing about who deserves to sit where." The words hit like a wave. People in the gallery nodded. One juror wiped away a tear. A sketch artist's pencil froze in midair. Even Judge Holloway, the same man who had fined her and questioned her presence just a day earlier, now leaned back in his chair with a different expression, not of irritation, but of intrigue. He didn't interrupt her. He didn't object. He listened. By the end of day 2, the prosecution's case looked like a broken pane of glass, once solid, now fractured under the weight of truth. Testimonies were riddled with contradiction. Evidence had been poked full of holes. The gallery, once tense, now murmured in growing support. Then came the announcement: the judge would reinstate Karoline's opening statement, the one he previously struck from the record, and review the constitutionality of the fine. That moment was symbolic. Not just legally, but emotionally. It meant that Karoline's voice, once dismissed, was now recognized as valid. As powerful. As essential. She had turned a moment of rejection into a platform of respect. And though the trial wasn't over yet, the tone had shifted dramatically. The courtroom knew it. The public watching through live updates knew it. Even Karoline's opposing counsel knew it. The tide had turned. And Karoline Leavitt wasn't just surviving in the courtroom anymore, she was leading it. Day 3. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation long before the judge entered. Word had spread. News crews waited outside. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #JusticeForTasha and #CarolineRises. Everyone, spectators, journalists, even seasoned attorneys, could feel it. Something big was coming. Judge Holloway stepped through the chamber doors, robe flowing, eyes forward. But this time, the authority in his walk was softened by something rare: humility. He took his seat, adjusted his microphone, and spoke directly into the record. After reviewing the motion filed by Ms. Leavitt and studying the relevant legal precedent, he began, "I have concluded that my previous ruling was in error." There was a pause. Then. "The fine is hereby dismissed. The strike from the record is rescinded." Ms. Leavitt's conduct was not disruptive, it was courageous. The room erupted. Applause broke out across the gallery. Even members of the jury couldn't hide their smiles. One court officer, usually stone-faced, nodded discreetly at Karoline. As the noise died down, Karoline simply looked to the judge, gave a respectful nod, and turned her focus back to the heart of the matter: Tasha Green. Because while the fine may have drawn headlines, Karoline's true mission was justice, for the single mother wrongfully arrested. And it all came down to her closing argument. She stepped forward, hands clasped lightly in front of her. She didn't pace. She didn't shout. She just spoke, with clarity, conviction, and calm fire. "This case has never just been about a necklace," she began. "It's about something far deeper. It's about whether a woman's voice matters when she marches peacefully. Whether her pain matters when her arms are twisted behind her back. Whether her dignity matters when no one else is watching." You could hear a pin drop. We talk about law, and we must. But law without empathy becomes a tool for oppression. My client didn't raise her voice. She didn't break a window. She stood quietly, holding a sign. And for that, she was treated like a threat. Then came the line that would later trend across platforms. "This isn't just about one protester or one necklace. It's about our right to be seen, to be heard, and to be respected, no matter our beliefs, our backgrounds, or our battles." She looked directly at the jury. No script. No notes. You're not just deciding if Tasha resisted arrest. You're deciding if her rights matter. If your rights matter. If the Constitution means what it says, not just on paper, but in practice. She thanked them and returned to her seat. For a few moments, the courtroom remained suspended in silence, as if no one dared to move after such a powerful close. The jury retired to deliberate. And shockingly, they returned in just 90 minutes. "We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty." Gasps echoed. Then came sobs. Tasha broke down in tears. She clutched Karoline's hand, whispering thank you over and over. Half the courtroom, friends, strangers, even a few skeptics, wiped their eyes. Karoline stood firm, her expression steady, but the hint of emotion was unmistakable. She'd done more than win a case, she defended a principle. As the judge dismissed the court, murmurs filled the air, not of gossip, but of admiration. Reporters rushed to file stories. Cameras flashed. But Karoline didn't go to the podium. She didn't give a victory speech. She knelt beside Tasha, still holding her hand, and whispered something only the two of them would ever hear. Because in Karoline's mind, this wasn't her moment, it was justice's. Within hours of the verdict, the courtroom drama spilled into headlines across the country. But this time, it wasn't the prosecution's case, or even the judge's reversal, that captured the spotlight. It was Karoline Leavitt. Major news outlets couldn't resist. Judge finds young attorney over cross, instantly regrets it. Karoline Leavitt, the legal prodigy America didn't see coming. A cross, a courtroom, and one epic comeback. Cable news segments replayed her argument on loop. Legal commentators debated her strategy. Clips of her defending her cross while citing the Constitution went viral. Millions were watching, and they weren't just impressed. They were inspired. Law schools from coast to coast sent her invitations to speak. Faith-based groups hailed her as a defender of religious liberty. Civil rights organizations pointed to her motion as a casebook example of how to challenge unconstitutional rulings with dignity and precision. But through it all, Karoline remained grounded. At her first national interview, a journalist asked, "Do you consider yourself a hero?" Karoline smiled softly, shaking her head. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a lawyer who stood for what was right. That's what the job requires." She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't cashing in on headlines. She wasn't even interested in the spotlight. She was focused on impact. Behind the scenes, she quietly started mentoring young law students, especially women, reminding them that strength doesn't always roar, sometimes it's calm, confident, and composed. She shared how faith had given her the courage to stand alone in that courtroom, and how knowledge had given her the power to win. In a follow-up interview, she explained, There will always be moments when you're underestimated. When your voice shakes. When someone tries to reduce you to a symbol, or silence you for one. But if you know your rights, and you fight with both skill and principle, you're unstoppable. It wasn't just talk. Karoline started taking on more civil rights cases, especially those involving freedom of expression and wrongful arrests. She turned her moment into a movement. Meanwhile, the woman she defended, Tasha Green, became a community advocate herself. She credits Karoline with changing her life. "She didn't just fight for me," Tasha said. "She reminded me that I mattered. That I wasn't invisible." And perhaps that's what made Karoline's rise so unique. She didn't win with theatrics. She didn't grandstand. She didn't belittle anyone, not even the judge who fined her. She won with grace. With facts. With faith. And in a world where noise often drowns out truth, Karoline Leavitt became the rare voice that cut through the chaos, not by being the loudest, but by being the clearest. In the months that followed, legal scholars began referencing the Leavitt motion when teaching courtroom decorum and constitutional rights. A few even predicted that Karoline might one day sit on the bench herself. But when asked about her future, she laughed. "I'm not thinking that far ahead. I just want to keep helping people. That's why I became a lawyer in the first place." Whether she was taking on powerful institutions or protecting the silenced, one thing became clear to the public, the press, and even her former critics. Karoline Leavitt wasn't just a legal genius. She was a force for justice. And her story was only just beginning.